Let's talk about Mounce chapters 26 and 27 quickly, and this is about participles. So, chapter 26 is really an introductory lesson on participles, and then the next chapter is where he really gets into the first kind of participle, which is the present stem participle, or what he likes to call the continuous participle. So. Let's walk through the handout that I've given you. This is in front of you here. And the first question that we want to ask ourselves and answer is what are participles? And I will abbreviate that PTC. Participles are verbal adjectives. If you've had me for any other language, you know that this is something that I insist that you memorize as a statement. Participles are verbal adjectives. Say that with me. Participles are verbal adjectives. Okay, participles are verbal adjectives, and what that means is that they share characteristics of both verbs and adjectives. What sort of verbal characteristics do they have? Well, one of the things that you can do with verbs in Greek is you can put them in a tense stem. Remember how we have the present tense uses the present stem, the aorist tense uses the aorist stem, and so forth. Our participles are going to have to choose a tense stem to use, and that will indicate aspect. We'll talk about that in a bit. And also, you always have to make a choice of which voice you're going to use if you're a Greek speaker, whether it be active, middle, or passive. Verbs can also take objects, direct objects, indirect objects. They can take modifiers like adverbs and prepositional phrases that are adverbial. Like if I said I hit the ball over the fence is a prepositional phrase, but it's modifying the verb hit. It's telling you where the hitting was directed, in this case, over the fence. So those are verbal characteristics of participles. We also have adjectival characteristics. You know all about adjectives. You're experts in those because of your first semester Greek. What do we know about adjectives? Well, adjectives have to be inflected. For what? For case, gender, and number. So we're going to have to dust off the old case endings. Haven't had to really think about them in a formal way aside from doing them in homework. We need to remember our case endings, which means we've got to remember things like declensions. Which declensions are which? How do you know if an adjective follows a particular declension pattern? You've got to look for the stem vowel and so forth. So they'll be inflected for case, gender, and number. And they can also do what other adjectives do. That is, they can be attributive, predicate, or substantival in their function. Okay? Mounce is going to reserve the adjectival function of participles, at least these sorts of functions, for the chapter after 27. But I'm at least wanting to introduce you to the concept here. So, what are participles? Participles are verbal adjectives. Good. And since participles are verbal adjectives, number two, they are describing or modifying something, whether that something is explicit or implicit. All right? So, whatever it is that they're modifying, they are going to agree with that thing in case, gender, and number. So that's what's going to dictate the case, gender, and number of any participle, is what is it conceptually describing in terms of the noun. Now, I'm going to simplify matters here, but remember, we have voice choices for our participles. And if the participle is active, then whatever it describes is the doer or the agent of the participial verbal action. And when that's the case, we will typically want to translate them with ing endings, eating, drinking, and so forth. If the participle is passive, then whatever it describes is the receiver or the patient of the participle's verbal action. Typically, we'll translate those not with ing, but with ed, d, or en forms of the verb. What we have learned is the past participle principal part. Okay? So I'll give you an example here. If you look at A, B, and C over here, I have an A, the biting man. The biting man. My noun is man, and biting is my participle. And notice here that it ends with ing. That tells me that this is an active participle. And since the word biting, the participle, is modifying man here, who is doing the biting? The man. The biting man is the man who bites. Under B, we have the bitten man. The bitten man. I'm using a participle there as well, but this is a passive participle, the bitten man. And even though man is in the same position and being described by the participle, since it's passive, the man is not doing the biting here. Who's doing the biting? We don't know exactly. We just know it's someone else. And he is the patient. That is to say, he is being acted upon. Someone else must be doing this biting. And then with C, we have, while eating the food, the dog growled. Now, I've underlined while eating the food here. And what I want to indicate here is that this phrase includes a participle at its core, eating. And then notice the food is the direct object, right? What is it the direct object of? The action of eating. Now, the word growled is a verb, and that's in the main clause. The main clause's verb might also take a direct object, okay? And what you're going to have to do, and this was true when we learned about relative clauses and haughty clauses, this is going to be true in participial phrases as well. Since participial phrases have a verb, a participle, as the core of them, there can be direct objects of the participle that are not the direct object of the main clause. And you're going to have to watch out. If you see an accusative noun and a participle nearby and a main verb nearby, you've got to decide, is this direct object part of the participial phrase, or is it part of the main clause's verb idea, okay? Over here, the food is the direct object of the participle. So this is just a reminder that participles are verbal adjectives. They can do what adjectives can do, but only better, because they can take direct objects too, can't they? So while eating the food, this is the participial phrase. The dog growled. Now, what is the part of the main clause that the participle eating is describing? It's active because we're using the ing form here. What is doing the eating? The dog. So if this were in Greek, what case, gender, and number do you think dog would be? Yeah, it'd be masculine singular, and since the dog is the subject of the main verb, it's going to be nominative. And so guess what case, gender, and number the participle would be? It would be masculine singular and nominative as well, okay? It's going to match whatever thing in the main clause is doing the action of the participle. It's going to match that thing's case, gender, and number. All right? One last thing to say about this participle is that it is an adverbial participial phrase. What does that mean? It's telling me something about the main verb. Adverbial things modify verbs. Adjectival things modify nouns, right? So if my participle is adverbial, what it's doing is it's qualifying the verbal action of some verb. In this case, it's qualifying the action of growling. What is it about the dog's growling that I'm saying by using this participle? I'm telling you when. When did the dog growl? Well, the dog growled while eating food. Okay? Participles can be adjectival, as in what we saw here, the biting man. It's telling me what kind of man, right? So the focus of the participle's description is on the man. But over here in C, the focus of the participle's description is actually on the verb, giving me temporal information about when the verb was carried out. Okay? We're going to be focusing on adverbial participles for a couple of chapters, and then we'll get to the basically the attributive adjective kind of participle functions too. Now, let's talk about how you form participles in Greek. What sort of participial formation are we looking at? One of the things that we will do if we were native Greek speakers, just sort of thinking in terms of producing Greek language and Greek sentences, a Greek speaker would have to choose a tense stem when choosing to use a participle. There are 3 tense stems that are going to be available for participial use: the present stem, the aorist stem, and the perfect stem. Okay, participles are not regular verb forms. We are outside of the indicative mood here. we've been learning indicative mood for several chapters, but with participles, we're dealing with what's called a non-finite verb form. It doesn't have a mood, and it isn't finite in that it doesn't mark person and number for, like we have personal endings in our other verbal forms in the indicative mood, okay? And what this also means is that participles are not going to indicate absolute time either. We are so accustomed, because we learned the indicative mood, of thinking of the tense stems as being used and used in ways that indicate true time, right? The present tense indicates present time, contemporaneous with the speaker speaking. The aorist and the imperfect tenses indicate past time with respect to the speaker's speaking. And the perfect, of course, represents action that has been completed in the past but has ongoing relevance or effects for the speaker at the time of speaking. When we get outside the indicative mood, and participles are part of that, we are no longer dealing with absolute time. That also means this: if we use one of the aorist stems, it's going to be unaugmented, because augments are always indicating past time in an absolute way, okay? If there's any sort of temporal distinctiveness, it's going to be what we call relative time, but not absolute time. So we're going to choose these stems, or the Greek speaker will have chosen stems, not based on time then, but based on aspect. And this is where a category that is not so clear to us from the English language is so important to the Greek. The writer is going to make a choice of the present stem versus the aorist stem based on a portrayal of the verbal action as it unfolds in time. Whether the writer wants to focus your attention on the unfolding of it through time, then he would use the present stem. If not, if the writer just wants to give you the action as a summary action, a complete whole, then would use the aorist stem, all right? Because of the fact that using terms like present, aorist, and perfect are so intertwined with notions of time or tense, Mounce and others have suggested using different terms for these. The pedagogical value of using them is that you have learned to identify tense stems, haven't you? The present stem should be different from the aorist stem if it's a second aorist, for example, and so forth. Your principal parts are predicated upon the fact that there are different tense stems, quote unquote, okay? So if you look at Mounce's little chart on page 240, 26.9, for Mounce here, I'll just jot that down, 26.9. So he gives you the tense stems there on the far right-hand side, but he tells you his terms for aspect, right? And as you know, I'm not a huge fan of the terms that he uses for aspect. So let me give you some other terms as well, okay? So he would say the present stem is used for continuous action. I would prefer personally to use the notion or the term imperfective aspect. The aorist is for perfective aspect. And then the perfect is really a combination of imperfective and perfective notions. And so some linguists are using the expression, I got to use an adjective form because imperfective and perfective are adjectives, right? So combinative, how's that? Combinative. All right. So, and then I'll just put Mounce's categories over here just so that you're clear. So he likes to call that continuous, undefined, and completed. All right. I am, for the most part, when I describe the stem used for the participle, and I describe that stem or that participle, I will probably more frequently call it the present stem participle to distinguish it from the present tense, okay? So a present stem participle is a participle that uses the present stem, but its aspect is imperfective, okay? An aorist-stemmed participle is a participle that's using the aorist stem, but its aspect is perfective. And the perfect stem participle has aspect that is combinative of the two. And in terms of the semantics of these, we've talked about imperfective is portraying the action as an unbounded action that unfolds in time. Perfective portrays the action as a bounded whole, and summary, snapshot kind of a portrayal without regard to how it unfolds in time. And then combinative or the perfect stem was used for action that is completed in a prior time but has ongoing relevance, implications, or results at the time of speaking. Okay, so let's move on here. So you can choose your stem. The participle will also be constructed of participle morphemes attached after the stem that's chosen. Now, how many of you know what a morpheme is? And this is not a drug, in case you were wondering. What is a morpheme? Okay, yes, it is. A morpheme is the minimal unit of meaning in a word. Words consist of lots of parts, and some morphemes that provide some unit of meaning are grammatical morphemes, and some of them are morphemes that relate to the lexical meaning. Let me just give you an example. You take boy and boys. How many morphemes do I have in boy? I have one. I can't chop the B off from the oi, oi, although I imagine there were probably many a Jewish mother who used the word oi right next to the word boy. Oy vey, boy. But this is as small as I can get with this word and have meaningful units. But if you take a look at the word boys, how many morphemes do I have? I have two. I have boy, and then I have the S morpheme. Boy itself is lexical. It has to do with the concept of boyness. But the S is not a lexical morpheme. It is a grammatical morpheme. It gives me grammatical information telling me that there are more than one boy hanging out here, okay? So the participle morphemes are morphemes that constitute some meaningful thing in the word that indicates in this situation that we're dealing with participles and not some other kind of verbal form. Now, I love these participle morphemes because they allow me to create a pun, okay? New Tau, NT, think New Testament, okay? That's one of the participle morphemes that we're going to learn. OT, or Omicron Tau, think Old Testament, okay? Now, New Tau and Omicron Tau, these are active morphemes. And then in the middle, in between them, are the middle passive morphemes, okay? Now, you know, the New Testament, of course, is the one that everybody reads these days, if they're in the Christian church. The Old Testament is fairly neglected, isn't it? New Tau is used for the present and the aorist stems in the active. Omicron Tau is used for the perfect active, okay? If you know anything about the Greek verbal system, the perfect tense is actually a lot less frequent than the active and the present and the aorist, okay? So it sort of maps onto the fact that many of our churches use the Old Testament much less frequently than they do the New Testament, right? Okay, good. Well, what came in between the Old Testament period and the New Testament period? The intertestamento period. And that's what we're dealing with here. Meno, mene. Okay, intertestamento. Now, middle passives, and this is true for all of the tense stems. Present stem, aorist stem, perfect stem. They're all going to use the meno, mene middle passive endings, okay? All right. Yeah, this is fun, isn't it? You like that? Okay, good. We're going to see this in action in just a few minutes. Okay, what comes after the participle morpheme? The connecting vowel plus case endings. All right, so this is just a layout here. We're going to see it in action in a moment. But if the participle is an active participle, masculine and neuter forms use third declension case endings. Feminine forms use first declension case endings. And if we're using the meno-mene forms, that's going to follow a 2-1-2 pattern. If you remember what that means, the first number is masculine, second number is feminine, third number is neuter, okay? And that's back to declension. Second declension, first declension, second declension. That is to say, masculine neuters use the second declension, and feminines use the first declension. That should stand to reason if you remember Mounce's noun rules. First declension nouns are nouns whose stem end with alpha or eta. Second declension nouns have stems that end with omicron. And then consonantal stems are third declension. Okay? So if it's meno-mene, that's second declension and first declension case endings that we're looking at. Third declension case endings will have stems that end with a consonant. And what's going to happen here is that nu tau, in most cases, is going to be what I'm adding my my case ending to. And when that happens, I'm not going to have a connecting vowel. I'm just going to get a straight case ending. It interacts sometimes with that tau and creates some funny forms. Okay? All right. Oops, and you know what? I just realized I made a mistake here. My connecting vowel does not go right before the case ending. It goes before the participle morpheme. All right, so do make that change there. The connecting vowel is actually going to go after the stem, but before the participle morpheme. Let me give you one example. Okay, I'll take lu, a, menas. Okay. So there's my stem, lu. Now I've got my connecting vowel. Then I have my meno-mene, right? And then I have my case ending. Okay. Let's take a look real quickly at the present stem participles, or the imperfective aspect participles. These are the ones that are going to indicate action as unfolding in time. Okay? What we're going to do is we're going to take the stem lu, which is our present stem. We're going to add our connecting vowel here, which is going to be omicron throughout our paradigm, because what we're dealing with in the active stem are nu tau participle morphemes. And remember, your rule is connecting vowels are omicron before what? Mu or nu, and then epsilon before anything else, okay? And we don't have any situations where that's really going to happen here. So then I'm going to have my nu tau, and then I'm going to have my case endings. And since I'm adding the case endings to nu tau, which case endings am I looking for here when I have nu tau? Third declension, right? Okay. So this is going to be true for the masculine and for the neuter. So what do I have here? What I should have had was this, lu for the nominative, lu, omicron, nu tau, and I should have had what case ending for the masculine nominative singular? Remember your third declension case endings? Should have been sigma, okay? What ends up happening here is that the sigma is not used, and the tau becomes final tau, and we know Greek likes to throw in the tau when it's final, so that goes away as well. And then I'm left with the nu, and the omicron, that was the connecting vowel, lengthens to compensate for the loss of my sigma and tau. Okay, so I'm left with this form luon, luon. I don't know. That's really not well explained in the language. When I get to the genitive, you remember the genitive forms are always going to tell you what your real stem is, because the real stem has been obscured now, hasn't it? I go back to lu, a, nu tau, participle morpheme, and now my genitive case ending os. And here, os can stay because there's nothing unusual about this. So I've got every part of what I'm looking for here, luontas. Luontas. Luonti, luonta. These are all of the standard third declension case endings that we have come to know and love, right? Yes.
Back a little bit here, but why does the omicron change into an omega?
Here, it's undergoing compensatory lengthening due to the loss of these consonants over here. Okay? Yes. Is that your question too? Or okay, great. For the neuter forms, it's lu on to, nu tau, plus what's my neuter nominative case ending? 0. It's supposed to be nothing. Okay? And so I didn't have to find a final tau due to a loss of anything because I don't add anything in the neuter. So final tau is still going to drop the final tau. And here, the omicron stays short, and it is luon. So luon versus luon. How are you going to tell the difference between these two? That lengthened connecting vowel here. Okay? It's going to be the only thing that's a serious difference.
Why did the omicron drop out?
What's that?
Why did the omicron drop out?
This here?
Yeah.
That's not an omicron. That's the symbol for nothing. 0.
Okay, never mind.
Okay, yep. Okay. Yep, that's okay though. Let's take a look at the rest of the forms here. Remember how in the neuter and the masculine, these forms are identical to each other? That was one of the things we learned in our Mounce noun rules. Genitive and dative have endings that are the same in masculine and neuter forms. So luontas and luonti are the same. And then one of our other noun rules was that neuters are identical in the nominative and the accusative. So whatever it was in the nominative, I'm going to have that for the accusative form here. That's not true for masculines, right? But that's true for neuters all the time. So once you learn your basic forms up here in the nominative and the genitive, then you really should know the rest of the forms if you know your case endings. Now let's just look at the masculine neuter forms on the plural sections. Here I have, again, all the same cast of characters I've learned from my third declension case endings, s, own, c, and as. I'm adding that to luont. The one thing that's different here is the dative plural. It should have been luont c, but you've learned that before sigmas, towels like to what? Drop, and so do news, and that leaves me with lu ah c, and this short omicron would like to compensatorily lengthen and become the diphthong, omicron upsilon, to compensate for the loss of those consonants. Okay? So I get, instead of luantsi, luusi. Now that's going to look a lot like the third person plural present active indicative of luo. So you're going to have to pay attention here and watch your context to know which it is. Just real quickly, the neuter forms are luanta with that alpha ending, which again is one of our noun rules and mounts. Neuter plurals in the nominative and accusative almost always end with alpha, right? The genitive and dative are the same as the masculine, luanton and luusi. And then I have luanta, which again is identical nominative and accusative forms in the plural for the neuter. All right? For the feminine forms, I'm not using I'm not using third declension. I'm using first declension. So in the active, we're dealing with a 3-1-3 pattern. Luusa is my form. This us ending is probably related to the nu tau ending, but some other phonetic issues have changed things around, and it ends up taking on an alpha eta stem that we are going to add our case endings after. Okay, so we're going to use all the same cast of characters of the first declension case endings: luusa, luuses, luuse, luusan, luusai, luuson, luusais, and luusas. All of those should be familiar to you from graphe, right? Graphe, graphes, doxa, doxes, and so forth, okay? So we're not learning any new case endings in this chapter. We're only learning how to add them to something new, which is the participle formation.